Mal O'Brien and Emma Carey. They both competed at the 2021 CrossFit Games as individuals, but both were eligible to compete as teams. And O'Brien won the wall walk and heavy thruster event. And also Guy Milleros, who won 3 events at the 2021 CrossFit Games, snatched 291 back as a teen athlete in 2017. So really, I don't see any way around it. Teen athletes are the future of CrossFit. Teen athletes are getting access to professional coaching. And well, since CrossFit has actually been around for a while now, they're actually the first generation who has grown up doing CrossFit. Teen athletes are, honestly doing some incredible things, and their recognition and just opportunities in the sport are going to continue to grow. So more than ever, we need to identify the best coaching and programming practices for teen CrossFit athletes. So today's outline, I want to go through 3 truths about teens and basically how these truths impact coaching and program design for teen athletes. Truth number 1, teens' joints are more resilient. Truth number 2, teens' bodies are growing. Truth number 3, teens are figuring out what they want. All right, so let's dive into the first one. Teens' joints are more resilient. Unfortunately, I know this already, just looking at my own movement and realizing the mileage on my joints. And I'm not even a master's athlete yet, but just realizing the difference between my joints and a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old is dramatically different. I'm sure other people can relate to this as well who are listening to this, because it tends to be a little bit of an older population who is actually really invested in learning about and trying to cultivate their understanding and doing things like listening to podcasts and listening to someone like me rant about them. And chances are you can probably also recognize that, their joints are a little bit different. So I'll say, first of all, this is going to impact their movement quality. So this might be obvious, but let's dive into this a little bit more. So the good thing about a lot of teen athletes is you can take them and you can manipulate them and put them in a position and be like, okay, maybe you've never snatched before, but I can tell you, okay, hold this bar over your head, lock out your elbows really aggressively. Okay, bring it back a little, get over the center of your neck. Okay, heels down, great. And they can actually move themselves and get in that position. So they probably haven't refined all their skills yet, but you can actually change them and put them in the position that you want them to. And because they have the joint freedom to be able to do that and really good joint resilience just overall as a whole, you can get them into a position, and with consistent exposure to that, they'll ingrain that relatively quickly. And if we compare this to somebody like a master's athlete who probably has a lot of wear and tear in their joints, maybe they were doing a lot of running, or maybe they just weren't active at all before and they don't have the tolerance to be able to handle those things, and they don't have the movement freedom, we're probably going to have to spend a good chunk of their training time, and they don't have a lot of time often, actually dedicated towards improving their movement, getting better ranges. And, that's a long road compared to just being able to say, okay, get in the position. You can get in that position now. Great. Like, that's a huge advantage for teen athletes, and it's something to take advantage of, right? They're probably going to be moving with some decent quality, with some consistent exposure pretty quickly off the bat. Now, I'll say this isn't always the case with teen athletes. Like, often if they're a competitive environment and they're maybe not working with a coach one-on-one, and they're just sort of get thrown into a class setting a lot or something where, they're always snatching up to a max, and every time it's going to look the same and it's always going to have the same flaws, just because they're not going through consistent progressions and having those exposures like I was talking about. However, if you do give them those consistent exposures and help them refine those skills, they're going to handle that very well, and their movement quality will remain, and they're going to be able to get into those positions relatively quickly, and that way they don't ingrain the wrong pattern. One of the themes that you'll probably hear come up again and again in this talk is basically saying like, hey, you need to take your time to develop this person into the well-rounded athlete that they need to be. So for teens' joints, movement quality is obviously going to be impacted. However, because movement quality is going to be impacted, their volume tolerance is also going to be impacted. So their ability to be able to handle doing just a lot of work is going to be much better than someone who doesn't move well. If you do 150 wall balls and your knees are tracking perfectly where they need to, and your torso is nice and upright, and your spine is neutral the whole time, and you're able to breathe effectively in those positions, you're going to have very minimal damage in those activities. If you're doing ring muscle ups and you can get into a full shoulder extension at the bottom of a dip without any pain or mechanical discomfort, and you can get into a nice, pretty arch position in the back of your ring muscle up, and because you have the full overhead range of motion that you need, again, that's just going to allow you to tolerate accumulating more reps of those movements through time. So one of the things that is important that we understand is that teens are actually going to be able to handle more frequent metcons and just doing a lot more skill work that's specific to the sport. So rather than going through arch holds and snap to hollows and scat pull-ups and all these other things, yes, those things are still important for the development of that person as a whole and to understand the positions that they need to be in, but they probably don't need the same amount of volume and those sorts of things relative to being able to just do the actual movement. So again, if I compare this to somebody like a master's athlete, if I have a master's athlete and they're only able to accumulate 15 or 20 ring muscle ups in a session without getting cranky shoulders, we're going to have to get a lot more creative in how we dose them so that they can continue to, do snatches the next day, and they can continue to do handstand push-ups and jerks and all the other overhead movements that they need to be doing on a weekly basis in the day-to-day. We have to be very careful about that. Whereas with a teen athlete, yeah, you still want to monitor their volume, but you can give them a lot more doses of sport work. So in other words, just the movements that you're going to see tested frequently in the sport, and they're going to respond to that really well. And they're probably going to actually learn and refine their skills through doing that. So that's another point that I want to make, is that teens are going to be able to learn and refine their skills through volume. So there is no better way to learn a skill than by just doing that skill. So if you need to learn how to do a bar muscle up, and you can do at least one bar muscle up, the best thing that you can do to refine your bar muscle ups is do more bar muscle ups. So if we have a teen athlete and they can do one bar muscle up, for example, as soon as they have that one rep and they can hit that consistently, we can then begin to add volume onto that. We can just begin to increase the number of reps that they're doing in a session, and maybe over the course of their week, where we're just upping the amount of reps that they're doing. And if you can do that in a linear way for a couple months, they're probably going to improve a lot in that movement just because they have consistent exposures to it. If you go from doing something infrequently or one time to doing it in a consistent format week over week, you're going to get better at that. And that's one of the big takeaways here. Teens have resilient joints, so we can put them in the position that they want, and we can start to refine their movement quality. As we're refining their movement quality, we can build on these skills that we're teaching them by adding volume and adding quality reps. As we add quality reps, the overall just efficiency and quality of their movement is going to continue to improve, and that'll kind of spiral up. As the number of reps that they're accumulating goes up, the endurance and sustainability in those patterns will go up. And then when you're enduring in a pattern and that is sustainable, then you can go faster. And when you go faster, you win. Moving on. So number 2, teens' bodies are growing. And I will say that for teens, they often haven't filled out the frame yet. And you can just see this play out in some of the physiques of the athletes. So for example, in the 16, 17-year-old female division, you'll see some athletes who are maybe a little bit later in their development, or a little bit more slender. They have a little bit less fat tissue, and they often lack a little bit in the maximal strength department. Maybe somebody like Haley Adams would be a good avatar for that, right? Where they don't have the same physique as some of the older, more mature athletes in the individual age group. And we can also take this the opposite way, where you'll look at some of the 16, 17-year-old female teens, and you can see that their development is a lot more similar to a lot of the individual athletes, where they have a little bit more body weight, they have a little bit more body fat, and that's distributed on their body ways that's a lot more representative of a fully developed female, in the sense that they're through puberty and they're developing breast tissue and things like that. And you'll see this play out where some teen athletes, because they're maturing a little bit quicker and they have those developmental curves that are occurring a little bit quicker, they're going to have more success earlier on because they're just ahead of a lot of the other teen athletes. And this is also the case, again, I keep comparing the boys to the individual males, because that's really the kind of contrast that's happening here. Like, oftentimes there are 16 and 17-year-old females who can compete in the individual age group like we saw in 2021. However, we're really not seeing that from the boys yet, where the 16, 17-year-olds, they might be excellent in some areas, but they're often lagging in, maximal strength or some of the top end qualities that they need relative to the individual males. And that's because teen boys lag a little bit behind teen girls in terms of their development relative to maybe the individual athletes or overall adults. Yeah, females just go through adolescence a little bit quicker. So the whole point of that aside was to say that teen athletes who have filled out their frame to the extent that is necessary for them to compete at their best are going to have more success in the sport, right? So it's something that we need to be going after as a long-term quality is filling out your frame to the degree that is necessary to perform in the sport appropriately. So how can we do this? First of all, I would say just having a well-rounded selection of strength and accessory movements, going back to just some strength and conditioning where they're getting frequent touches on moderate to higher rep ranges to help elicit hypertrophy and motor control, right? So it's going back to the motor control. It's going back to getting volume, which is in this case, like kind of think of it as like hypertrophy work where you're doing more of the strength training, higher reps, more sets. You're able to learn the movements. You're able to develop all the neural qualities that are necessary, and you're going to develop the muscle mass as well that's necessary to fill out your frame. And I'm not saying that you should neglect maximal strength. I think some people could potentially read into this and, think that I'm saying that. I'm not. However, I also don't think that it's necessary or would be helpful at all to have, in their programming 4 days a week where it says build to a heavy single. That's not going to be helpful at all. Whereas if we have an individual athlete who has great maximal strength and they've had this huge base of all of this strength and hypertrophy work that they've done over the years, that's might be something that could be plausible for them to help just kind of maintain some of the neural qualities that they need and have their reason for the muscle mass to kind of stick around, so to speak. However, again, I don't think that would be optimal for a athlete who has a younger training age, and especially not for a teen athlete who hasn't filled out their frame yet or likely hasn't filled out their frame yet. So that being said, I think that going through just some basic motor patterns and hitting those in a routine way that allows that athlete to progress over time and just run them through, it doesn't have to be a linear progression, but a progression that is just a little bit more basic, right? And that's actually an appropriate thing to give that athlete and to kind of hold them back in that respect. I think that's only going to help them in their long-term development. So making sure that they're getting doses of squats, making sure they're getting doses of hinges and pulls and presses and these basic motor patterns that are going to allow them to, again, start to just push their physiology in the way that they need to be able to fill out their frame and to be able to encourage the necessary amount of muscle mass and also just like the joint health and resiliency and the overall ability to be able to hold up to the amount of sport-specific work that they're going to be doing down the road or maybe in a certain time of year. That's only going to be super helpful for them. And also I'll say that this is a great method for teens who play other sports besides CrossFit. So maybe they do CrossFit in the summertime and the fall, and then they do swimming and track and field in the spring, or they do soccer in the fall, they do basketball in the winter, and then they do CrossFit through the rest of the year. Whatever the case is, where they play another sport and they also compete in CrossFit. And CrossFit's also sort of like their training for their other sport as well. I know a lot of teen athletes kind of work it in that way. I think this is especially a good method for them where you're focusing on the fundamentals of strength and conditioning and getting them the quality movement they need and prioritizing their long-term development and the structure and health and overall strength of their systems rather than just trying to go sport specific off the bat. I think the curve is going to be slightly slower, but if you can do it, they're going to last longer and they're going to stay healthier over the long term and they're going to set them up for long-term success in athletics regardless of what they do. And that kind of leads me to the third point of teens are still figuring out what they want. And that's one of the things that's important when you think about the programming. It's not just setting them up for success in CrossFit right now, but also setting them up for success in life and in sport in general, wherever they kind of want to take it. Because realistically, it's totally possible that they change their minds. Even the most dedicated athletes just decide that, you know what, I'm going to pivot and go a little bit of a different direction. And maybe they come back, maybe they don't. But this is all part of being a teen and, kind of going through your developmental process is you're figuring out what you want. So I have a story that probably some people could relate to. I was working with a teen athlete, a qualifier level athlete who realistically, I knew that we could get her to the games with a full season of dedicated focus training. And we kind of talked and we decided to commit to that And that was something that she wanted. And we started building out the program that would be really just, required to prepare her to get to the games, right? To maybe peak at the qualifier, to have her best performance, and to hopefully qualify for the CrossFit Games. So we started her down that process. And about 5 to 6 months into the season, we were doing double days, several days a week. She was PRing her lifts. She was moving well. Things were really kind of on track, and, things were looking really up, and I was excited to see what was going to happen here. And, we're getting closer to the season. And on one of her coaching calls, she was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And I was like, what? So long story short, she decided to step away from that goal. I was super excited. We were working towards this. We had all this momentum built. We had several months of training under our belt. We were just getting ready to gear up for the season, and she stepped away, right? And that's her choice, and that was perfectly fine. And I had to be okay with that as well, even though I had a lot invested into that. But here's the thing. It took her training like a games athlete to understand that she didn't want to have the games athlete lifestyle. And I get it, and I can't blame her for that, but all we can do is acknowledge it and help her to move on. And this sort of thing happens all the time. It's not even just with teen athletes. I have athletes all the time who are saying hey, I don't really think I want to be competitive anymore. Or I have somebody who's just been doing GPP programming for a while, and they're like, hey, I think I might enter a competition, give myself a little bit of a boost or an edge. And this sort of thing, like I said, it happens all the time, and it especially happens with younger people. And it's just because teens are still figuring out what they want. Lastly, I want to go through some other considerations for team athletes, and these are probably the most important takeaways that we can have in this podcast. Number one, teen athletes are minors, because if we're talking about the teen divisions, they're under 18 years old, they're minors. 2, the coach of a teen athlete is usually paid by that athlete's parent or parents. And 3, teens are less likely to understand what to expect from a professional coach. So these could be potentially good things. They could be potentially bad things. They are what they are. I don't really want to get into whether they're good or bad, so to speak. I want to get into what are the realities of it and what we can maybe do about it. So what I want to do now is I want to take on the lens of a parent who's potentially hiring a coach. Since teens are rarely going to have the disposable income that's necessary to actually hire the coach, the parent is the one doing that. I want to kind of role play, so to speak, in the sense that I want to kind of go through what I would be asking if I was a parent who's planning on hiring a coach. First thing that I would do if I was a parent is I would make sure that the coach has worked with other teen athletes before. So hey, what other teen athletes have you worked with? What level have they gotten to? What things were they working on? Just figuring out what this person's history is with other teen athletes. If possible, I would reach out to one of the parents of a teen athlete that this person is coaching. Maybe you just know them because they're in the community, or you can, find someone that you can reach out to. And basically what I would ask them is hey, are you comfortable and confident in this person as a coach? And you should get an honest answer out of them. And, as I'm kind of going through this, I would be asking myself okay, am I comfortable with this person knowing the details of my son or my daughter's life to the degree that's actually necessary for them to coach them and to help elicit their performance? So for example, maybe it's necessary to know some of the stressors that they have in their life, and maybe what's going on with certain relationships in their life, or potentially what time in the cycle that person is, or, details like that. They don't need to know everything, but they do need to know certain things. And that's kind of, part of the job of the coach and the parent working together, which is a whole other aspect of this, but working together to figure out, okay, what's an appropriate level to be working with my son or my daughter in this aspect. And it's just something that you need to be thinking through as a parent. And then it'll potentially go down 2 different tracks. Number one, if this is an in-person coach, straight up ask them, do you have the clearances that you need, right? Do you have abuse clearances? Do you have, FBI check, all that kind of stuff? And then figuring out by asking other people who have worked with them if they have a good track record with that. Because just because someone doesn't have anything issues with their clearances doesn't mean that they're an upstanding individual, right? You need to figure out, is this individual somebody that I want my son or daughter working with? And that's not even asking them as a coach. That is just asking them as a person. Is this a person that I want my son or daughter working with and spending a lot of time with, and basically sort of working in some of a mentor role? So that's one avenue. If we go down the remote coaching avenue, is this coach a person that you are comfortable having your son or your daughter sending their training related videos of themselves to this person? So they're probably going to need to be able to see their snatch and training. They're probably going to need to be able to see their back squats, and they're probably going to be able to see their qualifier to like figure out their pacing strategies and those sorts of things. So are you comfortable with your son or your daughter sending their training related videos to that person? And then the last thing I would ask is, again, to the parent of an athlete who's hopefully this coach has worked with before. Does this coach act more like a mentor or maybe like a mature guide of some kind? Or does this person interact in more of a peer-to-peer type relationship where it's more like buddy-buddy? And I've seen both ends of this, and it's a very important thing to kind of get into. Does this person act professional in the sense that they are reliable, they're consistent, they are nurturing in the right way that's helpful for the athlete and encouraging to them. And also they can kind of set them straight in the right way and the right tone when it's necessary. And then the opposite end of that, which is, in my opinion, less helpful, is having a coach who is more concerned with having that athlete like them, so to speak, in the sense that they want to be friends with that athlete. They want them to get along at all times. And oftentimes this relationship, it can be a little bit more volatile, but also it's just not ideal for the athlete's development or their development as just a human being. Like, it's necessary for them to have a mentor, and that's what you want out of a coach. It's important that this coach acts like a mentor, a guide, as someone that this person can look up to, and that they can direct them in the right way, and that they're not just trying to be friends with this person and to, write the programming for them. There's a very clear distinction between those two, and it's important that you get a coach who's acting as a mentor. So to sum it up, it's important to find a coach who A, has worked with teen athletes before, B, is trustworthy and actually has a good track record working with minors, C, is willing to communicate with both the teen and the parent, because realistically that's going to be happening, and it is an interesting dynamic, but is a necessary dynamic. It's one that is challenging in my experience, but also necessary. And that D, that both the teen athlete and the parent are comfortable working with the coach and are excited to work with that coach. So those are my main considerations that I would keep in mind for coaching and programming for teen athletes.